Thank you. Hello. How many law students in the room? A few. Thanks. Good. And other students? Film students? Wow. Okay. Let's keep it about film then. I'm going to talk about the process of putting the financing together for Hotel Rwanda. As Simon said, Hotel Rwanda had its world premiere here at TIFF in 2004. When I started my company, Prospero Pictures, in 2003, Hotel Rwanda was the first movie I produced, and it went on to be quite seriously and critically acclaimed at film festivals around the world. It won the Audience Award at almost every major film festival in the world, starting with the Toronto International Film Festival when it premiered here. So the thing about film financing is the two key ideas to keep in mind that we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes about how we put the financing together on Hotel Rwanda and some of the problems we had doing that. But the two key things to keep in mind as we focus on where the money came from. The first is that there's not enough money in the world. There's not enough money in the world to finance a movie. That is to say that the cost of making a theatrical feature film today is greater than the amount of money you would make if you pre-sold the exploitation rights to that film in every territory around the world. It wasn't always the case. It used to be that you could make about half the money that it cost to make a movie by selling what were called the domestic rights, that is the right to exploit and show the film in the United States and Canada, and about the other half from pre-selling the rights to the rest of the world, which in film parlance is called foreign. So between domestic, which is Canada, the United States, and foreign, a $20 million movie like Hotel Rwanda, you could expect to find $10 million in the US and $10 million in the rest of the world and be able to make the movie. That is no longer the case and hasn't been for about 15 years. And so Hotel Rwanda was a movie with a budget of about $20 million and an offer of about $5 million against the entire world, so a quarter of its budget as opposed to all of its budget. And it was languishing in Los Angeles with no hope of getting made for some number of years. Until a friend of mine sent me the script and said, is there a way you can find money in foreign or in Canada to help us make this movie? And that's the challenge I think that I'll talk about today. So there's not enough money in the world to make a movie, and you have to find the money elsewhere. And this slide shows that there are other sources of money other than pre-sales, and those sources tend to be equity, sometimes government-provided equity, sometimes bank debt or debt from lenders, and sometimes something else. In fact, almost always, in addition to all those things, something I've started to call the X factor, which is something else, some other source of money apart from the usual suspects that will help get the movie made. And in the case of Hotel Rwanda, we were able to find that in a very complicated structure. The other issue to keep in mind about film financing is that no one gives you the money up front. So everyone that promises to give you money, if they're going to pre-buy the exploitation rights in their territory, they agree to give you the money when you deliver the movie. And they see that it's in focus and it has the stars in it. You said we're going to be in it, and it's filmed in accordance with the script, and it's technically acceptable. And until that time, you need to borrow money against their promise to pay. And that loan is like a mortgage, and you have to put up collateral, like the title to your house in the case of a mortgage, or the title to your car in the case of a car loan. And in the case of a film loan, the collateral that we have is the negative of the film. So all we own is the right to exploit a movie that's doesn't yet exist. And one interesting thing about that is that half a movie is not worth half the cost of making it. It's worth zero. So unless you can actually finish the movie and make it and deliver it, your bank loan, your bank lenders will not be satisfied that they can realize on the asset that you've posted as collateral. And that introduces a whole series of problems that are also secondary to finding the money. Once you find it, you have to figure out how to get your hands on it so you can use it in the course of production to pay your actors and to pay your to rent lights and studio equipment and actually make the movie. So, if there isn't enough money from pre-sales to make the movie, where do we find the money? One thing that we've been able to identify and that Canada's been a kind of leader in the world is that there are sources of financing other than pre-sales that allow us to get movies made. In Canada, we have the great resource of a Crown corporation called Telefilm Canada, which invests in cultural products and allows us to help get movies made on the world stage. But Telefilm's not alone. In Australia, there's the Film Financing Corporation. In South Africa, there's the National Film and Video Foundation. So there are cultural entities around the world that, like Telefilm, invest in films. And that's one significant source of financing. And when I looked at Hotel Rwanda, I wondered whether we could get money from Telefilm or from one of these other cultural entities around the world to help finance the movie. And of course, the relationship with Canada, relatively weak. In the case of Hotel Rwanda, there's just me. There's no cultural component that is Canadian. And so the idea of raising money in Canada, which was really the first question to me, can we find money in Canada, was the answer had to be probably not. And so my quest was, where else could we go? Obviously, Hotel Rwanda has a significant African story. And so I looked to the NFVF, the National Film and Video Foundation in South Africa, and as well to another entity called the IDC. So in addition to these cultural sources of financing, there are also industrial sources of financing. Sources of financing that, I see the bus from Conestoga is here. How's the highway? Come in. Horrible. Thanks for coming. In addition to these sources of cultural financing from government bodies, there's also industrial financing. So financing that doesn't depend on whether you're culturally Canadian or South African or Australian or British, but whether you're actually doing the work in that country. And so examples of this are, of course, the tax credits that we get in Ontario and Quebec and Manitoba and British Columbia, which don't really care why you're making a movie, but if you're making a movie and creating jobs, they will provide a source of financing to encourage the production. And in South Africa, the IDC was a brand new was an old organization of South Africa that invested in export-oriented industries like gold mining, and had a brand new office which was intended to invest in film production. And I happened to know the people who started it, and I pitched them the idea of Hotel Rwanda, and they were very excited about the opportunity to invest in a Hollywood-style feature film that had very significant relationship to South Africa, both at the cultural level and that was going to be filmed in South Africa, so at the industrial level. And that is how we started the quest for additional financing. Now, I sometimes call Hotel Rwanda came to me with no money attached to it. We had, as I said, about a $6 million offer against the world, which was grossly insufficient to get the movie made. But we also had a movie. We had a movie deal meeting with the United Artists, and United Artists ultimately, American studio, offered $3 million for the U.S. rights. So that's about right. If the U.S. is worth about half the world, you'd expect if they were going to offer $6 million for the world, they'd offer $3 million for the U.S. So we took that offer. That was 15% of our financing, and we still had to find 85% of the financing in order to get the movie made. And so the solution was to find some combination of industrially sourced incentives and cultural incentives that we could bring together on the same picture. And by doing that, we were able to, we had to, in fact, combine financing from South Africa with financing from the United Kingdom, and in this case, from Italy. So as I said, the story takes place in Africa. The film was going to be filmed in South Africa, but at a cultural level, most of the critical cultural components were British. So the writer-director, Terry George, who had written Academy Award-nominated movies, wanted to be the director. It was almost his first feature film. It was not that easy to find financing for him on the basis that he was a world-renowned director. He was a world-renowned writer, but not a world-renowned director. We had stars like Don Cheadle and Sophie Okonedo, who were, Don was well known. It was Sophie's second movie of her life, but he was not a big enough star to attract significant pre-sales. And so we were looking really at combining sources of primarily government and equity financing to help us make up the cost of the movie. So Canada is a party to a number of treaties around with countries around the world, 52 treaties, which allow us to combine our cultural product and the people who work on it, artists, performers, technicians, with crews from other countries, and the film that we make will essentially be recognized as cultural product of our country and the other country. So this is a co-production treaty. We have, as I say, about 52 treaties with about 49 countries. We have several treaties with multiple treaties with a couple of countries. The United Kingdom has 8 bilateral treaties and is party to a multinational convention with the rest of the European Union countries. And so it seemed to me that there was a possibility of joining British financing with South African financing through one of these co-production treaties. The challenge was that the United Kingdom and South Africa didn't have a treaty between them. And so we needed a third country to actually bring the two countries together. We had organic elements from the United Kingdom, the writer, the director, some of the leads. We had the organic elements from South Africa, the location of the story, and the location of filming. But what we didn't have was a link between South Africa and the United Kingdom. And as we were facing this challenge, South Africa and Italy signed a co-production treaty. Now the UK, one of the UK's 8 bilateral treaties is with Italy. And so it seemed to me possible, just possible, that if we structured a co-production between a South African company, an Italian company, and that same Italian company and a British company, we could bring the British financing to the movie that required the movie to be British, and the South African financing to the movie that required the movie to be South African, and we could also make the movie Italian. Yes, I accept. There were no Italian elements in the movie at that time. My Italian partner said to me one day, Martin, you know it would be helpful for us if there were an Italian actor in the movie. And I said, yes, there should be. I said, what role do you think? Do you have someone in mind? He said, yes, Roberto Citran is a very well-known Italian actor, and it would be great if he were in the movie. And I said, great. What role do you think he should have in the movie? You know, the major roles are already cast. And he said, maybe a priest. And I said, okay, I will, I think, so I called Terry George, the writer. I said, is there a priest in the movie? He said, not yet, but we could put a priest in the movie, absolutely. I said, that would be really helpful. He said, yeah, there's a priest in the new draft. I said, great, send me the new draft. So he sends me the draft. I sent it to the guy. I said, great news, there's a priest in the movie, and he can be Roberto Citran if you'd like him to be. He said, oh, Martin, it's fantastic. And that thus began a long, so it looked like it was actually going to be a way of making this happen, and thus began a long process of months of literally every day 2 or 3 problems coming up that were completely insurmountable, and every day trying to get at least 1 or 2 of them surmounted, resolved, and then the next day there would be new problems. One of those problems was that Federico called me the next day and said, Martin, I read the new draft. I said, yes, it's terrific, isn't it? You ready? Is Roberto going to do the movie? He said, but there's no priest. And I said, what do you mean there's no priest? There's a priest in the new draft. He said, no, there's no priest. I've read the draft. So I had to call Terry George back and say, Terry, there's no priest in the draft. He said, no, I'm writing the priest. I'm writing the priest. He's not in there yet. So I said, you got to send me the pages with the priest in them. He said, well, I haven't anyway. 2 days later, he prepared 6 new pages in which there was a priest, and I sent them to Federico, and he was very happy to have them, and Roberto got cast in the movie. You'll see he shows up in the movie very, very briefly. But it allowed us actually to hang our hat on a cultural link among the 3 countries. That was very significant. So we were able to bring together financing, about 35% of the financing from the United Kingdom, from an equity group that had a mandate to invest equity in British films, and now this was a British film. We had about 45% of the financing came from the IDC, this Industrial Development Corporation in South Africa, which was established to invest in export-oriented industries, including the film business, but could only invest in South African films, and now this was a South African film. And we had about 20% of financing from Italy, because now this was an Italian film, because Roberto Citran was in it. In fact, the composer, who was actually an Academy Award nominated composer, was also Italian, and that was very significant to the movie. So we had a film, we had the financing, and now we had to organize the bank loan, and that really was the step that took the most concentration and coordination. So we had the promise of money from the IDC, the promise of money from United Artists, the promise of money from this equity fund in the United Kingdom, the promise of money from Italy, and all this money was going to become available to us, and it all totaled $20 million, which was terrific. In fact, miraculous. As I say, I don't think it'll happen again. It was the perfect storm, and it was related to those entities and their specific desire to get this particular movie made at this particular time. And we still had to negotiate a bank loan that would allow us to get our hands on the money in time to make the movie, because all of these people were going to pay us the money when the film was delivered. So the key document in this bank loan is called an inter-party agreement, an IPA, and it's about a 50 or 60 or 80-page document that describes the varying security interests of each of the financial participants in the one piece of collateral. So when you take a mortgage on your home, you have one item, which is your home, and you pledge it to the bank, and they give you money, to buy it. And the bank is in first position to take if you stop paying them, they get your home. Same with a car loan. Well, in this case, we had about 6 different people, all of whom had a claim on the one thing, which is the film negative, if we didn't pay off the bank loan. And so the inter-party agreement is a document which describes the rights of each of those entities, who gets first claim in what territory, and so on, in case something goes wrong. And so I went to London, where our lawyers were, to negotiate the inter-party agreement, which was the final document necessary for closing the financing and giving us the cash to make the movie. And I thought I would be there for about 3 days, assuming that it would take a day and a half or 2 days to get this done, and then we'd have a dinner, and then we'd celebrate, and I would go back home. And it turned into a 16-day kind of hostage-taking, in which my partner and I literally woke up every day at 7 in the morning when it was already 9 o'clock in Johannesburg, and started digging into the first of many conflicts among the 6 different parties that we needed to solve, and if we didn't, we wouldn't close the IPA, and we wouldn't get the financing, and we'd have to pay for our own hotel room, and we'd have to go back home without getting the movie made. And we would be bankrupt, probably. All of this was going on while people were building sets in South Africa. We shot in a hotel. We had to build a hotel. We built a swimming pool. And we spent about $3 million, which we had borrowed, to get the movie ready to start shooting when it had to shoot, in order that it would be ready to deliver when it had to be delivered, so it would be accepted by the people who pre-bought it. And so it's one thing to sit in a room and try and negotiate with a bunch of people. It's another thing to sit in a room and try and negotiate with a bunch of people, some of whom are Italian and they're in Milan, and some of whom are South African and they're in Johannesburg, and some of whom are American and they're in Los Angeles. And by the way, they don't get to their office till 9:30 or 10 o'clock LA time, and by then it's 5:30 or 6 London time, and it's already, by the way, 8 o'clock at night in Johannesburg. So we were on a 24-hour negotiating schedule that started at 7 in the morning and ended at just after midnight. And then we'd sleep for 5 hours and we'd start again the next day. And we did that every day for 16 days until we got the project financed. And I guess I wanted to just share with you two quick negotiating tips that arise out of that situation, that series of events for me. And the first is friends in high places. So when we started putting this project together, I had a meeting at my office. As I said, it was the first movie of my new company, Prospero Pictures. And here at TIFF, during the Toronto Film Festival, a lot of people came in from out of town, and so we had the representative from United Artists, the representative from the IDC, the representative from the British Equity Fund, in fact, the film commissioner from Johannesburg, and the film commissioner brought with him the premier of the province of Gauteng province in South Africa, where Johannesburg is. So we had about 12 people around my conference table in my office, and we had lunch, and each one of them pledged, you know, whatever you need, you let me know, we're going to get this movie made. And one day, one of the many days when we had problems with closing the IPA, I had a phone call from the head of the IDC, or the head of the film department at the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation. Remember, they're putting up over 40% of the financing. And she said, "Martin, I have every reason to believe that this investment is going to be approved." And I said, "Yes, that is good, because we are making the movie. We've borrowed $3 million. We're building it. You said it was going to be approved, and you've promised us the money, and the bank is just waiting for approval of your board on the financing documents." And she said, "Yes, well, as you know, our investment is subject to the approval of the board, and I have every reason to believe the board will approve it." And I said, "Well, that's great. All we need them to do is approve it today or tomorrow, because, as you know, we're filming next week, and we need the money." And she said, "Oh, well, that's not going to be possible, because the next board meeting isn't until April." This was January 5th. And I said, I didn't laugh. I could have laughed, but I didn't laugh. I said, "Well, in April we'll all be dead. We'll all be gone. I mean, this won't exist. If we can't finance this movie, I'm going to fire everyone. We have 100 people working in Johannesburg. We're going to fire them all today if we can't finance the movie. And we can't finance the movie unless the board approves it." She said, "Well, there's nothing I can do, because the board doesn't sit till April. So, but I'm sure that they'll approve it." And I said, "Well, the bank loan won't close, because your financing is conditional on this board approval. And conditional financing is essentially no financing. And so our IPA won't be signed, and then the money won't flow, and then we'll all be out of work. We'll all be out of business." And she said, "Yes, well, it's, good luck." She got off the phone. So I didn't know what to do. And this was in the context that literally this kind of thing happened twice a day for, a month. But this one seemed completely insurmountable, more so than others. And so I called the film commissioner. I said, "This is what I just heard, and this is impossible, and I'm going to fire everyone today." He said, "Don't fire anyone. Don't do that. Let me call the premier." The premier came to your office, and the premier pledged his support, and he said, "You let us know when you need our help. Now we need your help. Now we need his help. Let's call him." So about 2 hours of nail-biting time later, he called me back and said, "I can't tell you why, but everything's fine. Don't worry." And I hung up the phone, and about 20 minutes later, Sonia, the woman who's the head of the film unit at IDC, called and said, "I've just driven around to the houses of each of the board members and gotten them to sign the approval, so the investment is approved. Good luck with the movie." And as it turns out, I got back to the film commissioner. I told him what had happened, and he said, yes, I told you it would be fine." And I said, "You got to tell me. You got to tell me what happened." And he said, well, it turns out the wife of the premier is the chair of the IDC. So she's the boss of Sonia's boss. And she called and asked Sonia to please do this in certain terms. And it was done. So it's an important lesson, not really a lesson in nepotism, but a lesson in negotiating. That is, when you're negotiating with another party, it's really important to know that you can get beyond the lawyer, beyond the lawyering, beyond the issues, and get to a place where there's a policy reason or an emotional investment at a higher level on the other side that you can appeal to, because that happened over and over and over again, and that's just one of the many examples. One quick final example, and then we'll get to the movie. One document that needed to be signed before the IPA could be closed was a pledge of the copyright ownership of the film to the British Fund. So the British Fund, I said, could only invest in British movies, and it could only invest in British movies if it owned the copyright in the movies. And the copyright belongs to all of the co-producers, so the Italian company owned part of the copyright, and the British company owned part of the copyright, and the South African company owned part of the copyright. And the fund had a variety of rules, and one of them was that it had to own copyright from prior to the commencement of principal photography. Principal photography is the point at which you commence filming with principal actors. And so, we were going to start on a certain day in January. I think it was January 6th, January 11th. And so we had to assign copyright, all three of us, into the British fund, or, again, the fund structure wouldn't work, the fund would be out, that 30% of the financing would be gone, we wouldn't be able to sign the IPA, we wouldn't have the financing to make the movie, and we would all have to go home, and I'd have to pay my own hotel bill. And one Friday, our British lawyer said to our Italian lawyer, look, I know we're going to sign all these documents. I know there are still some documents we haven't signed to your satisfaction. I know you still have some comments on some of the documents. But we've been doing this for 6 months. We've signed a lot of the documents, or at least we've agreed to sign them. We've agreed to the form in which they would exist. And so, and we're supposed to start shooting on Monday. Monday is the first day of principal photography, and it's Friday. So if you wouldn't mind, let me just propose, she said, that you sign this one piece of paper which assigns copyright into the fund, and that will allow us to continue and do what we need to do on Monday. And we can keep talking about these contracts, and I'm sure we will satisfy you. I promise we'll satisfy you. We'll get the language right. And if everything goes pear-shaped and we can't satisfy you on the language, we'll just take this assignment of copyright, we'll just tear it up, we'll pretend it never existed. And which is not an unreasonable proposal. The lawyer for the Italian investor said, well, in my country, we call that fraud. I'm out. And she left the room, and she left her office, and she went home. And this was the Friday before the Monday, which had to start shooting. So I went upstairs. I know I needed friends in high places, so I knew the president of the company that she worked for. I called him and I said, this is in fact Federico, who wanted the priest in the movie. I called him back and said, we got the priest in the movie, but we have a problem, because your lawyer has left. And he said, yes, I know, it's a terrible problem. I said, well, she's left, she's gone home. He said, yes, I told her she should go home. She was very upset. And I said, I'm upset too, because we're making this movie on Monday, and it's Friday, and she's not there, and you have to sign all your contracts. And he said, well, I agree with you. You have a very big problem, and I don't know how you're going to solve it. And I said, well, I have to speak with her. He said, well, I told her not to work tomorrow, Saturday, but why don't you call her on Sunday, and maybe you can work something out. And I said, this is absolutely impossible. This is a practical impossibility to do everything we have to do if I call her on Sunday. I managed to get a hold of her on the Saturday morning, again, bitten my fingernails to the quick. And she said, yes, I'm very upset. I don't think there's any way of getting this done. You know what? My confidence in you and your colleagues has been shaken by what your lawyer said. So I don't think it's right to have us sign something that we think we're going to tear up later. I said, I don't think that's right either. I think that's a terrible idea. She said, the only thing we can do is just sign all the documents. I said, that's what we have to do. We have to sign all the documents. She said, well, I have comments on, I have to reread all the documents now because I just feel as though we need to start from the beginning and do everything over again. I said, okay, well, let's do that. Let's do that today. She said, well, I'm not going to do it till tomorrow because Federico told me to take the day off because I was so upset. I said, okay, let's do it tomorrow. So she said, it's not clear. There's so many documents. I said, there's literally a 9-inch 3-ring binder full of documents that they have to sign that we've been negotiating for 6 months. And she wanted to renegotiate every one of them in one day on a Sunday. I said, that's a lot of documents. She said, it's probably impossible. I said, well, okay, first, it can't be impossible because we have to get this done. We're making this movie. And second, why don't we just, would you have any ideas? And she said, well, my cousin has a law firm in Milan, and maybe if you hire them, they can help. And I said, okay, we'll give me your cousin's phone number. We'll call him. We'll hire him right now. And so we did. And they agreed to come in on Sunday, as long as we hired them, and help us read through the documents and redraft them. So on Sunday, we got on the phone at noon and started on the first contract that was done and settled months before, and started reading it together, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, going through it to find issues that she had. She was correcting my grammar. She says, Martin, the parties agree. I think it's the parties agrees. I said, no, leave the English to me. No, I think it should be agrees. Okay, we changed it to agrees. We changed whatever she wanted that was not fatal to the structure of the agreement. And the truth is, we agreed on the overall structure. It was some of the language that she wanted clarified, and we clarified language in that first contract. And it took about 2.5 hours. And about 2:45 in the afternoon, my British lawyer came into the room and said, Marty, you're going to be here all night if you're going to do this. This is crazy. You're mad. This is crazy. And I said, well, you tell me what plan B is. I don't have no plan B. I can't afford the hotel bill across the street, and I have to get this done. We're shooting tomorrow. And she said, okay. So we moved on to the second contract and on to the third contract. And 3 o'clock turned into 4 o'clock, turned into 6 o'clock. By 9 o'clock, they were begging to have a break for dinner of an hour. And I said, well, we can't take a break for dinner because we need to get this movie made in the morning. And so we agreed on a 25-minute break, and we did that and came back at 10 o'clock, and we worked till midnight, and we worked till 2 in the morning and 3 in the morning. And at 6 in the morning, we started arguing about how long a break we would take for coffee in the morning. We took 17 minutes for coffee. I went across the street to my hotel, showered and changed, and came back. And at 6:30, we got back on the phone. And we went till 7:30 and 8:30. And 9 o'clock was crew call time. This was Monday morning. And we were shooting. It was the first day of principal photography, and we hadn't signed that assignment, assigning copyright into the fund, which meant that the people in England were calling me, or going to call me soon, and say, you're not allowed to shoot because we don't own the copyright. You haven't signed that document. I said, we're getting to it. We're getting to it, I promise. And by the way, it is the first day of principal photography, but we haven't started filming yet. So I called production in Johannesburg and said, you haven't started filming yet. They said, no, well, we're rehearsing and then we'll start filming shortly. I said, you will not start filming. You can do camera tests today, but you cannot film until I call you. You must have the daily production reports show that this is a day of rehearsal and camera test and not a day of principal photography. And I said, okay, fine, whatever. So I went back and said, we're not filming today. We're rehearsing today. And so that was 9 o'clock, turned into 10 o'clock, turned into 11, 12. At 12 o'clock, we were getting close to the bottom of the pile, and she called and said, I just want to say that, our CEO is leaving Milan shortly for Rome today. He's on a 2 o'clock flight for Rome. So I don't think this is going to get done today. We'll probably have to do them next week when he's back. I said, no, we can't. That's not possible. Let's get it done. So we focused on getting the last documents done. And by 1:15, we were on the last document. We went through. She didn't let up. We went through every line of it. And at 1:20, as he was on his way to the airport, the CEO signed every one of the contracts and started sending PDFs of the signature pages with his signature on them. And that was 26 hours after we had first gotten on the phone. And I called production and said, "You can start shooting now." And they did. So when you come home from grade 3 and it says on your report card that you work well with others, that's a sign that you might have a future in the film business. I'll be back after the film to answer questions. Enjoy the movie.
So we're happy to take questions. I wanted to start actually with a question that was prompted by your very first remarks, that about 15 years ago the financing structure completely changed and now has to be done in a different way. And I was just wondering why that's the case. How did it change 15 years ago?
Really, in my 25 or so years in the industry, there's just been a constant level of ebb and flow. And what happened is a lot of the markets that traditionally you could rely on for financing, like Japan, like Germany, which are enormous, have enormous populations, and so therefore can afford to pay for the exploitation rights to films, their economies started softening. So about 15 years ago, the German Neuer market, the new stock market in Germany, which had been very, very successful, crashed. So they had a stock market crash in Germany, basically, which led to the collapse of pre-sale prices in Germany, which meant that German pre-sales were suddenly worth a tenth of what they previously had been, and that started a kind of a domino effect throughout Europe that softened the European market for feature films. And so it led to the softening of the foreign market. And then the market in the United States has a different problem, which is that it's still a very robust market for feature films, but so disproportionate an amount of the box office dollars in the United States go to what we call tentpole films, large studio films with budgets of $100 and $200 million. So even though there are more theaters than ever and the theaters are charging more than ever, most of the money goes to studio movies. So independent pictures like this have a very hard time getting their hands on the dollars from audiences. So it's been a kind of a 1-2 punch: the softening of Japan, the softening of Germany, and then the rest of Europe, which has only gotten worse now in the last number of years since the last global financial crisis, and then the dominance of the U.S. market by large budget studio pictures.
Hi, thanks for the presentation and for coming today. I just wanted to ask you, given that I'd been reading sort of about the industry, given that budgets for films tend to be or seem to be increasing more and more now with new technology and et cetera, I had read that hedge funds have been moving into film financing a little more in terms of basically financing film slates and investing in film slates. But I was wondering if you could speak a bit about what the state of private investing institutions and hedge funds are in terms of their relation to investing directly into productions.
Sure, that's a good question. So the question is, well, I guess you heard the question because you have a microphone. What's the role of private money, I guess, in film financing? So as I was saying, the studios have really been retrenching from the independent world. And budgets have been not just growing, but actually bifurcating. So at the top end, budgets have been going from $70 and $80 million for big budget movies to now $180 and $200 million for big budget movies. So the studio money is driving into the really large budget movies. And then at the other end, movies like this, which was made for $20 million 10 years ago, which then was a high budget but not a crazy budget. It would be very, very difficult to finance this movie for anything more than $5 or $6 million today. And the only way we were able to do it then was with private money, essentially. The British equity fund, there was a tax advantaged component to the structured financing from the British fund, but nevertheless it was private money. And now more than ever, there is precisely for the reason that I described right at the beginning of my presentation, that there's not enough money to justify the making of a movie at the level that it should be made. And yet some movies do make money. There's a real vacuum which has been filled by it was filled by hedge funds a lot before the crash. The hedge funds retrenched significantly, and now there are new private equity funds that have come in providing both a mix of debt and equity. So they now call themselves mezzanine debt financiers. So they put up, they're starting to take the place of the banks. So as I said in my presentation, you have to borrow the money from someone. So there are groups of private capital that are willing to lend money as if they were a bank, charge interest as if they were a bank, against the pre-sale contracts and the tax credit money and the other, whatever other sources of revenue you have promised to you for the film. And they'll also put an additional amount in as essentially equity, and charge an enormous amount for doing that. And they're getting a lot of, they're doing well. They're getting a lot of business. So yeah, just to break that down, it's a movie like, take this movie for example. Even though it was made for $20 million and it went on and made $37 or $40 million at the box office, and then it had a very strong life in DVD and home video. The investors are recouping their money from that revenue rather than from the pre-sales revenue or from even the sales that were made as it was being made but before it was released.
Hi. I was just wondering what you think of the longevity of crowdsourcing and like crowdfunding, like Kickstarter and websites like that, and whether you think that if they'd been kicking around 10 years ago, they would have been able to help you guys find that kind of financing. Because when you say genocide in Rwanda, it's something that people know about, or did anyways. But yeah, thank you.
No, that's a good question. Look, Kickstarter and Indiegogo are fantastically positive sources for crowdfunding for new films, I think, particularly films with a message. I'm literally working on a project right now, and I was meeting yesterday with the people who are designing our Indiegogo and Kickstarter plan. It's funny that you say Rwanda and genocide, there must be a built-in audience there for crowdsourcing. When we made this movie 10 years ago, no one had ever heard of Rwanda. Sorry, that's the bold statement. No one we couldn't say this is a movie about the genocide in Rwanda. No one had any idea. The line of Joaquin Phoenix in the movie when he said people are going to say that sounds terrible and go back to their dinner, that was absolutely true. No one. It was remarkable how many places we went in the world where people said, "Yeah, I sort of I remember that story. Something about Africa, right?" No real, even though it was in the paper every day. 1 million people died in 100 days in the genocide in Rwanda, which I pointed out is like the World Trade Towers going down 3 times a day, every day, day after day, week after week, for 3.5 months. That's how many people were killed with machetes in Rwanda. And the level of knowledge or perception of that story was almost nil until we made this movie. There were 5 other movies made on the subject after this movie. There have been a dozen or more popular books written about it and studies done on it. But I still meet people who said they had no idea what was going on until they saw Hotel Rwanda. So you know, it was a great it was a great blessing, really, to be able to be involved in a project like this that opened so many minds and changed so many hearts. And yet, to try and launch a movie about this and crowdsourcing would have been very, very difficult, even then, because the awareness wasn't there.
I think we can take just one or two more. Please go ahead.
So just a bit interested in talking about funding from different countries and having a cultural or national component to the film. What do you, I guess I'm just sort of interested in Canadian history and our cultural protection sort of thing, like CanCon, 30% for radio, that sort of thing. What have you come across in the different countries or institutions like that? I guess I'm just interested in numbers or proportions. How would you say Canada compares to some places like Italy or Britain that you worked with?
That's a good question. By the way, did you see the priest in the movie? Sorry. Yeah. He got the flu. He shot for 3 days in the rain, and he was unhappy. It was a good role. Canada is like many other countries. We're sinking under a wave of the outflow of Hollywood. So we all like to go to see Hollywood movies. It's fun to see Iron Man. But when each and every dollar that's spent at the movie theater gets sucked back into Hollywood, it's hard to generate space to make movies that are made here and get them seen. And, I say that as a guy who's made 4 movies with David Cronenberg, and we have a pretty good profile both here and around the world. But we face the same struggle that they face in Australia and in the United Kingdom and in Germany and France and Spain. But with one difference, of course, we're not protected by difference in language. So, and our media is overwhelmingly saturated with stories from the U.S. So we watch Letterman or Kimmel, and those stars are on, and those movies are out, and it's hard not to be sucked into the domestic marketplace. And that's why historically, as I said, the U.S. domestic marketplace has been defined since the beginning of cinema as the U.S. and Canada. And that's a really kind of repugnant thing. And I do my best every day to try and separate them. I tried to do it on this movie. I told you we sold the U.S. rights to United Artists for 15% of the budget, about $3 million, which the people at United Artists, which is now owned by MGM, call the gift that keeps on giving. So they've made millions and millions and millions of dollars on Hotel Rwanda and claim it still hasn't broken even yet for them. So that's the beauty of financing in the studio system. It was impossible for me to separate the Canadian rights from the U.S. rights on that deal. They were going to reduce I could have. They would reduce their minimum guarantee of $3 million to $2 million. So Canada, which is 8% of the North American marketplace, they wanted 33% of the fee to come off for Canada. So we try to maintain a foothold in the industry, but other countries have similar problems. What's kind of interesting is that until Spain's economy collapsed last year, and similarly in Germany, which is softening. But every year there's in the top 10 films in many of the international markets, there are 80% of the films are Hollywood studio films, and 20% of them are local films. And so what a lot of the studios have done, like Paramount and Universal, is to go around to France and Portugal and Spain and Germany and set up subsidiaries like Fox Germany. A friend of mine is running Fox Germany now. And their goal is to take control of the last 20% so that the locally produced independent German language movie is a Fox Germany production so that they can, not, I mean, it sounds like I'm against the studio system. It's just, it is what it is. It's just hard to get people to go out and see local movies, and when they do, that wave of capitalism comes over the wall, and the studio system tries to grab onto it. So we're the support that we get from Telefilm, which is similar to the support in France from the CNC, which is similar to the support from the Film Financing Corporation in Australia. These are, which is similar to the support for the British Film Institute in the UK. We're all kind of fighting the same fight, which is kind of why we have this international treaty system, which allows all of these countries, but not the United States, to work together to make movies to try and find a foothold in the world in contradistinction to American studio product. I don't know if that's a bit of a rambly answer.
Just one last question,
All right,
please.
hi there. So I would like to ask, can you tell us any projects that you're working on, Mr. Katz, or any future plans that you have?
Sure, I just came back from Los Angeles. I'm working on a movie called Maps to the Stars, which is David Cronenberg directing, John Cusack and Julianne Moore and Mia Wasikowska and Olivia Williams and Sarah Gadon and Robert Pattinson in a movie about about Hollywood. So, and it'll be finished in the spring and it'll be out in the fall, and it's pretty cool.
All right. Well, it just remains for me to thank Martin Katz again for coming and talking to us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.